Hi Student Success. This video is for week 13 already, Wednesday, April 15th. So we are just floating right along here. As a reminder, due by tonight is your, I scrolled too quickly for my own good there, is your week 12 assignment, your money management assignment. That was in last week's video, so the video is right there. When you go into the actual assignment folder, you'll see another video just a couple minutes long, kind of going into more depth with the assignment, and there's the assignment itself, the assignment and the Dropbox. So those are both, not both, that is the only thing. That is due tonight, Wednesday, April 15th, and that helps me take track of your week 12 attendance. So today's video is going to focus on week 13. So I'm going to scroll down here. We are going to be in chapter 9. There are going to be 2 assignments associated with this chapter. So I'm going to go ahead and open up, and there is a, let me scroll back here. There's a PowerPoint I want to introduce and just talk to you about some concepts for a few minutes, and then I'll talk to you about your assignments that are going to be due next week. So chapter 9 is about memory and taking tests. So both things that are fairly important as a college student, and I would say memory as just a person in general, having that memory and developing that memory capability. So, obviously in this chapter, you're going to hopefully relate because you have to use memory techniques and you have to remember information and then you have to apply it on different tests. So working memory, there's different kinds of models out there of memory, short-term, long-term, working memory. Basically what they're saying here is that when you have senses, you see, smell, taste, feel, whatever sense you take in information, that involves your working memory. So whatever, sense maybe if you're multisensory or maybe your senses are picking up, your sense of smell, whatever sense that you use is how you would intake information in your environment, and it goes to your working memory. And normally things that are meaningful to you are going to stay kind of in that working memory for a little bit. If you see or smell or hear something and you're like, yeah, you're not interested, it's not going to stay with you. And then the point of working memory is you have to work with it to move it along to be able to remember it. So working or short-term memory, depending on the kind of model you're looking at, is just that. It's supposed to be in like a limited storage space for you to remember for maybe anywhere from 30 seconds to a couple minutes, and then you have to work on it to move it to that long-term storage. So you take it in, you record it through one of your senses or multiple senses, and then you kind of figure out, do I really need that information? If you don't, you kind of discard it. If you do, you need to work with it. You need to try to retain that information. Now, our long-term memories have no bounds. We can literally remember every single thing we ever learn, see, read. The difference is do we have value on what we are trying to see, smell, read, taste, or have we forgotten to work with it? So that's why if you are, in your 20s and maybe you cannot remember anything from your early childhood, it's because as a child you weren't working with those memories constantly or thinking of them or retrieving them. So the main thing is you have to practice retrieval with your memories as well, and that's where a lot of people get stuck. They can't remember things because they didn't practice retrieving them. So here are some ways to kind of make sure that you are helping your memory. You practice or rehearse information. When I study for things, I do like little rhymes or songs or gimmicks, whatever it might mean, that kind of helps me remember that information and then practice it. So if I have a test coming up, I don't just study the information, I practice retrieving the information. So that might mean a study group, a practice quiz, a study guide, something where I have to actually practice getting the information out of my memory and putting it into play. Another thing is making sure that you are making the information meaningful to you. Now, oftentimes as a college student, you might learn something like, I don't know why I have to know this. So you have to kind of really work to try to make it relate to you. Okay, at the very level, you have to know this to pass a test. Or the larger level, I have to know this information to be a more successful engineer or nurse or whatever it might be. So working with the material, manipulating it, involving your different senses, being creative, all those are different ways to master memory. And as you go through chapter 9 and look a little bit more closely on your own, you'll see some more in-depth tips there. So then it starts to transition into test taking. So there's a whole bunch of tips. You can see there's 2 slides worth, and then obviously it goes into more detail in your text. So before you take a test, there's a lot of preparation work that goes into test taking. Test taking does not start the day of the test. There are things you have to do before, meaning that you have to show up and be engaged in class. You have to read the material. You have to understand what's going on. All of that is part of test prep. And then making sure that you are actually doing specific test work, knowing what kind of content will be on the test, what's the format of the test, start reviewing for the actual test a couple of days ahead of time, making sure that you're using enough energy and focus that is going to allow you to be effective in that study strategies. So if it works for you, they do say that one of the most effective ways to learn and study is to study with other students, to kind of try to see, how other students are understanding information. There are certain things that you shouldn't be doing, using stimulants to help you stay awake. Also, a lot of students really struggle with this one. If they think it's open book or open note or take home, they don't study or they don't put as much energy into it. But usually those are the ones that teachers will grade more harshly because you have more time, you have more resources. So make sure that you are still, using those resources and practicing and studying for even open note, open book, take-home type tests. Another part of testing is just knowing that sometimes you do have test anxiety, and there are different aspects of test anxiety, and the text chapter will go over more in depth. So if you feel like, you really have test anxiety, this is something that you struggle with and you've been working on it, there are different reasons why we struggle with test anxiety. Our brains kind of go into this fight or flight mode, that hundreds of years ago we might have had to when we were cavemen. I don't say we, but society, we had to fight or flight to survive. That is still part of our brain. So when we have a test and we see it as a threat, our brain goes into fight or flight oftentimes, and that's where you go. What people will explain going blank in front of a test. Their mind goes blank. It's because we go into fight or flight, and our brain cannot really function whenever we are in that. So there's lots of different reasons. That's more cognitive, a little bit behavioral, but there are emotional and physiological aspects of test anxiety as well. So here are some more tips actually during the test. Remember a couple slides ago I was talking about the things you need to do before the test, making sure that you're preparing, being active in class, engaging, knowing what the test is about, but then you also have some tips for during the test. When you get to the test, as soon as it starts, maybe jot anything down that you're like, oh, I really think I'm going to forget this. So jot it down right away. Look at the exam first so you know how many questions there are, and you can kind of manage your time based on that. Make sure you look at all the questions carefully, look at all the directions carefully, make sure you know if something is asking for more than one part, one answer, know the format. Start with what you know. That way you're getting all the stuff you absolutely know out of the way, and then you can focus later on the stuff that maybe you're not quite as confident on. Other kind of during the test tips, make sure that you only change your answers if you're convinced you're wrong. There's been a lot of research on this. Most of the time, people will change a right answer to a wrong answer instead of the other way around. So only change your answer if something maybe earlier in the test jogged your memory, oh my gosh, I got that one wrong, go back and change it. So just make sure you don't change your answer unless you have an absolutely great reason for doing that. Ask for clarification on directions, not necessarily content, but directions. Another thing, don't give in to peer pressure, meaning if you've ever been in a room and all of a sudden you see people getting up and turning their test in early and you're like, oh my gosh, they're done, why aren't I done yet? Don't give in to that, because you have no idea if that person really knew their information or they just kind of flew through it because they don't know it. So don't assume just because someone turns a test in early that they did really well. So take your own time, making sure that you allow time even to go back through and make sure you get. That's one thing I often see from students. They'll turn in a test and be like, well, why didn't you answer that question? Oh, I didn't even know I left it blank. So make sure that you review it and answer all the questions. So there are different types of tests, and you want to prepare for those tests in different ways. True, false type questions, you want to look for statements that either make the whole statement false, the whole statement true. You want to look for those qualifiers where they say all of these are true except, or including, all of these are correct. So make sure you look for those kind of words. And so it says, assume statements are true until you can prove them false. That's one way to kind of look at those true and false type questions. So the text chapter does go into more depth about that. And then we have multiple choice. So there's a lot of tips on multiple choice type questions. You want to look, I always tell students, cover up the answers. Don't look at the answers until you've actually read the question, because oftentimes we think we see the answer and we go to that, but we haven't even really read the question all the way. So cover up your answers. Read the entire question first, anticipate what you think the answer is, and then look at your options. And then you can kind of start to maybe eliminate ones that you know are incorrect or not a good choice, and then look for the one that is the best option. And then also always be careful of like the all of the above, none of the above option. Also, we have types of tests in terms of short answer, fill in the blank, and matching. So these kind of things, again, short answer, it's just a mini essay, so you want to plan it out, make sure you have a clear like main idea, thesis, you support your answer, and it's always going to reflect back to what the question is actually asking. And then essay tests, there's a lot to go on with essay tests. We talked a lot about kind of the writing process before break. Essay tests would fall into that category, making sure that you plan enough time, you brainstorm, you have your thesis, you draft your body, you make sure that you check your grammar, everything's organized, you proofread, you summarize at the end. So it's kind of like that whole writing process for a full paper boiled down to an essay test. So there are some more tips in your text about those different kinds of tests as well. So also you want to make sure that, oftentimes this is always kind of what's shocking to me, is students will spend just as much, if not more time, figuring out a way to cheat as they would have if they just studied. So make sure you just put your energy and time into studying, because, you can't cheat your way through your job. If you get in the habit of cheating on tests and assignments and things like that, you're going to assume you can get away with that when you get into the workforce, and that's not going to be a reality for you. So make sure that you are putting the energy into studying. And then after the test, continue to learn. Another thing, students will get their test back and they'll put it away like, oh, great, I got an A, or I got a B, or oh, I sucked on it, whatever. Reflect. Look at the comments. Look at the feedback. Review anything you missed, understand why you missed the questions, understand why you got the questions correct, and then ask if you have a question or if you think there was an error, but don't just put the test away and never look at it again. That's an opportunity to still continue learning, especially if you have a test at the end of the semester where it's cumulative, where you have chapters 1 through 10 tests all on one exam at the end. So it helps you kind of prepare that way as well. So that is chapter 9 of your text, and I will encourage you to, open up chapter 9 and do a little bit more in-depth reading there. Look at the PowerPoint, look at the suggestions, especially if you feel like you either struggle with memory, you struggle with test taking, you struggle with test anxiety, anything that we covered in there. I really encourage you to get into the test and take some time to look at those strategies. Okay, so the assignments for this chapter. We have 2 assignments here. So these 2 go together. Test your memory. What you will do is you will open up this little survey here, and it's going to open up usually in a brand new window. And it's going to have like you walk through like this little, I don't want to show you all this stuff, but it's going to walk you through like a little memory exercise. So you're going to complete that first. Then you'll come back, click into here. You'll see the questions are up here still, and it's going to ask you about how you did on that particular survey. You can click Write Submission right there, so you can keep the questions right there, and just respond. So how many words were you able to remember? Which words did you forget? And what memory technique did you use? So that is your test your memory exercise for this chapter. Again, the survey is right up here. You have to take that first, and then you'll go and you'll answer those questions. Okay, now the second thing is your journal entry. So your journal entry, per usual here, is the insight or action. Okay, again, you are choosing one or the other, and remember, it is 5 to 8 sentences in length, so it's about a paragraph long, not terribly long. So make sure that you're keeping up with like the length requirement. So your insight is for you to go back and look at the beginning of the chapter study case. It's on a student named Kevin Baxter. So talking about some struggles and some situations that Kevin is facing. So your insight talks about, how would you come up with some outcomes for Kevin's story? Like, what could Kevin do based on the things that you've talked about and read about in this chapter? The action part has 3 questions that you'll just address referencing the chapter itself. And again, some of you prefer to just kind of write your submission right in there. Some of you have been writing a Word document and uploading it, whatever works best for you. So, and it's number 7 because it's the 7th journal of the semester, although it covers chapter 9, right? So those are the 2 assignments that you are completing for April 22nd, and those will count for your week 13 attendance. So you want to make sure that you're completing both of those by April 22nd for your week 13 attendance points. Okay, hope you all are doing well. Please reach out if you have any questions. Talk to you later.